Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Athletic Greens.
There are so many stressors in life, and it can be really hard to maintain effective nutritional habits. So many things are going on in our lives. That's where Athletic Greens can help you. It's a life-changing nutritional habit. It's an all-in-one superfood powder that you take every day. It is the easiest and most delicious nutritional habit that I have added to my routine ever.
When I take it, I literally feel like my brain goes, woo.
That's exactly what they're hoping your brain will do. One scoop has 75 vitamins, minerals, and whole food sourced ingredients. There's a multivitamin, multi-mineral, probiotic. They all work together to fill in the nutritional gaps in your diet. They can increase your energy. They can aid with digestion, all without the need to take multiple products or a million pills, which is what I used to do.
You know what I love?
What do you love?
I love that they're keto-friendly, paleo-friendly. You love that they're vegan-friendly. What else are they?
It's also dairy-free, it's gluten-free, and there's less than 1 gram of sugar. It's amazing. They're offering a very special deal right now. You get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase if you visit our link today. It's a simple, sustainable, nutritional habit. Whether you're looking for peak performance or just better health, go to athleticgreens.com/breakdown and join health experts, athletes, and just health-conscious go-getters like me and Jonathan who make a daily commitment to our health every day. Go to athleticgreens.com/breakdown and
get your free year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs today.
It's interesting you say that it's hard to believe that she was schizophrenic, but I wanted to portray her as this funny person. I mean, I was dating a guy who was actually a prostitute. My mom really loved him, and I told her how he supported himself, and she said, Danny, never ever refer to him as a hustler. Just say that he's in real estate and manages a very large rental property.
Hi, I'm Mayim Bialik, and welcome to my breakdown. This is the place where we break things down so you don't have to.
It's Mayim Bialik's Breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you, because you know she knows a thing or two. So now she's gonna break down, she's gonna break it down.
We have a really neat episode today. We're going to be talking to author Dan Mathews. Who's Dan Mathews? Well, he's the senior vice president of PETA, but we're not going to be talking to him about people for the ethical treatment of animals. We're going to be talking about his book, Like Crazy, Life with My Mother and Her Invisible Friends. It's like the kind of book I wish you would just trust me and please buy it, because it's like I want to say things about it. I don't want to say things about it, but we're going to talk to him about what it was like growing up with a mother who was schizophrenic and undiagnosed until she was in her 80s. And what that was like. He moved his mother in with him when he was 40, and it's an unbelievable story. But first, I'd like to introduce everybody's favorite ray of sunshine, Jonathan Cohen.
Hi, Mayim.
Hi, Jonathan.
You're the voice in my head.
We will be talking about voices in people's heads, and Jonathan keeps finding different ways today to tell me that he hears my voice in his head. Sometimes I think it means because he's wearing AirPods, or just he hears my voice echoing in his head.
Just like when I'm going around, my daily life.
What does my voice say, Jonathan?
Are you going to eat that? Is that what you're going to have for lunch? Are you taking care of yourself? You're going to sleep now? It's a little early to go to sleep.
What does your mom's voice sound like? Also that?
I had to tune her out. Just kidding, Mom.
Just slid right in there.
Although I did try to start calling my mother by her first name, as Dan talks about calling his mother by her first name.
Right.
And my mother did not like that at all.
Well, secret's out of the bag. You still call her by her first name.
When I call her, she and I have made an agreement that I will call her Mom or Mother.
When you talk about her, you call her your mum.
I don't call her Ma.
John and I are wearing purple today. He's also wearing a hoodie over the purple. We're wearing different shades of purple because we're different people. I know a lot of you listening might think they're the same person. Someone yesterday asked if we're siblings.
And you said yes.
Except I'm the brother and he's the sister. But word of the day.
Mayim, let's do a word of the day, which no one's going to expect. It's called schizoaffective disorder.
Schizoaffective disorder has symptoms or features of schizophrenia, like hallucinations or delusions, But it also has mood disorder symptoms like depression or mania. So there's two kinds of schizoaffective disorder. There's the bipolar type, meaning you're bipolar and also you have symptoms of schizophrenia, or you just experience depression and then you have features of schizophrenia. So those are kind of your two choices. This is kind of one of those diagnoses that reminds us we're all just on a spectrum here. It's just chemicals. They're floating around because of your genetics. They're floating around because of your environment. If you've experienced trauma, you're going to get a whole different set that people who don't experience trauma get. The features of schizoaffective disorder that often do occur in schizophrenia are things like delusions. Do you know what a delusion is, Jonathan? I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it's like a word that we use, but do you know what delusions means?
I mean, isn't it like a perception of something that is not real, or the distortion of something that is real?
You're so smart. Have that voice in your head later today. You're so smart, Jonathan Cohen.
I'm going to plus that up.
Delusions are false, fixed beliefs that you hold despite evidence to the contrary. People talk about delusions of grandeur, which often occurs in mania or manic episodes of bipolar disorder. Many artists have delusions of grandeur. Another feature of schizophrenia would be hallucinations, being incoherent. That's something that also happens in schizophrenia. This is a weird catch-all, bizarre or unusual behavior. Have you ever participated in bizarre or unusual behavior, Jonathan?
Well,
why are you lying? I'm looking at your face and it's about to lie. Of course. I mean, everybody has.
Well, I was going to say, I don't want to make light of the situation, but like, yeah, of course.
Right. Well, no, but the point is, yeah, of course.
I mean, a lot of my life, I'm just like, really? This is happening?
You are an exceptionally bizarre and unusual person. In isolation, that does not mean you are schizophrenic. You know, the notion of like impaired occupational functioning, like not being able to keep a job, not having good social functioning.
Okay, but hold on. The terminology bizarre and unusual is very subjective. What is bizarre and unusual to one is totally normal to another.
Says someone who has a bizarre and unusual pattern of behavior. In and of itself, bizarre and unusual behavior is not diagnostic criteria, but with these other things, delusions, hallucinations, having trouble keeping jobs and having social interactions, problems managing personal care, like when you combine all these things with then a combination of mania and depression or a depressive episode, that's when you start hearing this diagnosis of schizoaffective. Suicidal thoughts will sometimes also happen in schizoaffective disorder, especially if it's of the depressed type or in manic depression as well. Also, certain mind-altering drugs can increase these symptoms. That happens in schizophrenia as well. And Dan Mathews will talk about how his mother avoided that. And in addition, people who have schizoaffective disorder or live with schizoaffective disorder are also at increased risk of a lot of the same challenges that people who are schizophrenic are at risk of. Interpersonal conflicts, isolating, suicidal attempts or thoughts, also like substance abuse problem, all the things that you do to try and make those things go away. Yeah, so that's the word of the day. I'd like to talk about Dan Mathews, who's going to be joining us in a minute. The New York Times called him such a nice zealot for his work with PETA. He started as a volunteer, and he'll talk a little bit about that. He started as a volunteer for PETA as a young fella, and then became a receptionist. And some of the amazing things he's done, he launched Rather Go Naked Than Wear Fur campaign, which really put PETA on the board in 1992. I remember that. I was still in high school and not even yet a vegetarian, and I remember hearing about that. He's dressed up as a carrot in Kansas, a cow in Denver. He crashed a furrier's fashion show in Milan dressed as a priest. He has convinced Calvin Klein to stop designing with fur. He has pressured GM to stop using animals in crash tests. He has lobbied Gillette to halt tests on animals, and he does this all in very, very elaborate and interesting ways. He leads a raid. He storms places. Like, he's a big, big PETA personality. But what he's here to talk about today is his second book. He wrote a memoir called Committed, which has been published in a ton of different countries. But he decided to write a memoir because the most interesting person in his first memoir was his mother, who went by the name Perry, among other names. And he wrote this really, really beautiful book, which is a very different perspective on schizophrenia. If you've got any heartstrings left, he's going to tug at them. So if you're If you're a Scrooge, grab a tissue. It's a really, really beautiful story. It is really an honor to welcome Dan Mathews.
Break it down.
Dan. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
The first thing I like everyone to remember is that I'm a vegan too.
Yes.
We're not going to talk about veganism the whole time, but I do want to acknowledge what a tremendous force you are in the vegan world, and you were instrumental in the "I'd rather go naked than wear fur" campaign, which for many people was the first time that they heard of PETA. I actually, it might have been the first time that I heard of PETA.
Wow.
What year was that?
The first one was 1992.
Wow, I was in high school. Yeah, I was still in high school.
We did it out of desperation. It didn't start as a celebrity ad campaign. It started in the streets of Tokyo when there was this huge international fur convention in Tokyo. They were trying to put fur into the Japanese economy when it was on the ups. And so we tried to get the Japanese group to do a protest, but they said people frown on protesters in Japan. It's considered rude. And they would just say a Buddhist prayer and pass out leaflets. And we thought, well, that's great, but there needs to be a complimentary action. And my friend Julia and I, she quit her job and came with me, and we decided to pretend that we were an American stripper couple and that we flew to Tokyo to do our striptease outside the fur fair with a banner that said we'd rather go naked than wear fur, in Japanese in the front and English in the back. And the Japanese groups begged us to not do it, but the troubled teen volunteers of the Japanese group said it was the best thing they ever heard. And on the sly, they translated the news release, painted the banner, came down to the site with us, and it was a mob scene. And that's how it started, just desperation in the streets.
American strippers, that's how Mayim and I travel.
That's how we do all of our protests. It's such an honor to speak to you just as a vegan and as an activist for your role in that. I also love that you started as a receptionist there at PETA.
That's right.
And
volunteer, and then receptionist. I started when I was fresh out of college from AU in 1985. I was 20 years old. I was not even of drinking age. And now it's been almost 38 years later, and I'm still there.
Incredible.
And I hope it comes through in my new book. My mom was the person who really championed me doing this when it was completely counterculture. She loved it when I would get arrested in protests.
Yeah, I mean, this was a long time ago. And like I said, that campaign came out. I was a junior in high school. I was not even a vegetarian yet. I wanted to be. You're here today, not just to make this vegan heart so happy, but you have written this book, and it's called Like Crazy: Life with My Mother and Her Invisible Friends. This is an unbelievable book. It's an unbelievable book in that you write so eloquently and so beautifully, and it's such a I hesitate to say it's a fun read, but it is so much fun to learn about your life and what you were like. Ultimately, your decision to take in your mother to live with you, which that in and of itself, if we know nothing else about you.
What's funny is I wrote a memoir more about how I became, I went from a gay bashed kid in high school to a big animal rights global advocate. That was my first book, Committed, and my mother was everybody's favorite character in that book, even though there was, sex symbols and fashion designers and rock stars and all that. My mom was everyone's favorite character. And after I wrote that book, it came out in 2007 and came out in like a dozen other countries, I started thinking about how really she made everything possible for me because of her intimate, intuitive bond with animals ever since I can remember. We would move all the time. We would move in shopping carts, often didn't have a phone or whatever. It was a very odd upbringing, my single mother and me and my two brothers. But the bond with animals, she had us bring in cats that were being abused in the streets, kids throwing rocks at pregnant cats was our first one. And she always, even though we lived in an apartment that didn't allow any animals, she said, we've got to look out for the animals. And we lived in an apartment that allowed none, and we had litters, strays in every closet, got them spayed, neutered, all that stuff. And it wasn't until later, that was when I first, at an early age, became really attuned to animals and how they need protecting. But then my mother was always a bit a bit out of her mind. She was brilliant and she was hilarious and she was witty, but there would be this disconnect sometime where she would have this gloom that would descend on her. And when I was growing up, my brothers and I just thought it was damage from her having grown up in orphanages during the Depression. And she would never really talk about her early years very much. And after I released my first book, I thought, you know what? I really owe so much to her. And she was kind of going off the skids. You know, she was just between apartments all the time. My brothers and I would always take turns helping her get apartments. And I thought, you know, now when I was, you know, in the AIDS era of the 80s and 90s, she would look after all of my friends whose own parents turned them out because they were gay.
Okay, so hold on. There's so many things. So just because, you know, I'm people may not have read the book, but I have. So I want you to kind of like, I want you to walk us through. So you were raised by, you know, I mean, I'm sure you heard every adjective. I'm sure you used every adjective. She was eccentric. She was, you know, kooky. She was out there. She was an unusual woman. And I believe you described the first time that you knew something was definitely off. And I just may cry and not stop as I talk to you. I think you were 9, you said, correct?
Yep.
And you had this experience where she greeted you were away and you came back, and she picked you up in the airport.
Yep, LAX.
Right. And the way you described it also was that like she had like a mascara stained face, like, and there wasn't really a sense of composure about her. Like she looked okay, but she wasn't okay. And it was kind of the first time that you realized that the story that she had in her head was, it's not that it just wasn't true. It's that she had an entirely different reality inside of her. But you were a child, and as children, we kind of like whatever is around us is kind of what's normal. But it was at that point that you knew like, But it's many years from 9 until we see this story unfold. It was not until your mother was, as you say, in her 9th decade of life that she was formally diagnosed as a schizophrenic. And many people think about schizophrenia and, you know, it was one of the first mental illness categories that I ever explained to my children, because here in Los Angeles, you know, there are a lot of homeless people experiencing homelessness. And one of the things they would ask me is, why are they yelling and why are they talking to themselves and what's going on? And one of the things with schizophrenia that often happens is hallucinations and delusions. And what I explain to my children is that they're completely real to the person having them. They're not seeing things. They're not hearing things. Like even the language that we use around schizophrenia, their brains are producing things that to them are real because the brain is producing them in ways that are completely consistent with everything else that we experience as reality. So your mother was not that person, right? She was like, she didn't live in the street. She just coasted.
It was close. It was close.
Right.
I mean, like literally when I was a kid, we moved in shopping carts because we didn't have a car. We would have candlelight dinners because the electricity was cut off. There's this confusing thing about schizophrenia to most people, I think, is that there's 40 versions of it. You can have visual hallucinations. You can have audio hallucinations.
You can have paranoia or not paranoia.
Right. And or it can be a creative. I mean, there's a thing I write in the book where some people hear sounds in their head and write top 10 pop songs or award-winning symphonies. Other people can't put all those sounds together, but they still hear them. And there's a fine line between creativity and insanity. And my mom straddled that line so well. You know, she was always a little bit crackers. And I actually moved away from home after high school immediately to get away from it so that I could get my own life going and not have to feel like there was constant drama. But then when I was 40 and I decided to move her in because I really owed so much of my life being a lifelong animal activist to her. So I moved her. I bought this house here, 1870 house in Portsmouth, Virginia, just a few blocks from the harbor, and moved her in. Never had owned a home before, you know, didn't know how to fix things. But my mother was the same. To us, a screwdriver was a cocktail, not a tool. And we just were these two kind of helpless people just trying to make it work out in this dilapidated fixer-upper house. But there was, I just made the decision that I had to do it, and it was an adventure. Luckily, within a year of moving her in, I met my future husband, Jack. And like my mom was an orphan, she grew up in orphanages. Jack also, he was adopted 3 times actually. And so he and my mom bonded instantly. There's an orphan bond that I never had witnessed before, but they bonded so firmly over that. Plus, Jack grew up in a Catholic military family where he didn't feel comfortable coming out, had 4 kids. And so they bonded. She helped nurture him into coming out and being openly gay. So he ended up moving in after a year or so. And then we just had this phenomenal nucleus. It was this modern family, the 3 of us, Jack's ex-wife, who's a wonderful Latina, their 4 kids. Now we've got grandkids. It became this bizarre life. But as soon as my mom went from her 70s into her 80s.
Hold on one second, because I want to finish kind of like this portion of Dan's life before we kind of go into sort of this next phase. When people come out now, it's so different, still challenging, still complicated. We still live in a homophobic, transphobic, patriarchal structure of insanity. But the time when you grew up and the time when you came out and your friends, it was a very, very different climate. And also, so the notion that your mother, was able to connect that way. Tell us a little bit about that, because it's such a beautiful story.
Well, I grew up in Orange County in Costa Mesa, and I was in junior high at age 13 when the Briggs Initiative was introduced in California. And that was a bill sponsored by Orange County Republicans, where I was from, to make it illegal for gays to not only teach in school, but to be supportive of gay rights. And when you're 13 and I'm already getting gay bashed, it's like a green light and it's stamp of approval for everybody to be anti-gay. And so it was really surreal. And of course, at 13, I remember thinking, I wonder if it's illegal for me as a gay to even attend school. Wouldn't that be awesome? I wouldn't have to go to school. I could just move to Italy or something. But it was just a strange time. That was right when Harvey Milk made his entrance into the national stage, brief stay there. But my mom would champion me when I would get beat up at school. She would come in and wipe the floor with these kids' parents and with the vice principals and at the school. But anyways, just a few years later, when AIDS hit, my best childhood friend Michael Georgia contracted it, and his own parents, who were friends of mine as well, told him, quote, "We'd rather you told us." They told him he was gay and that he had AIDS at the same time. That was the double whammy in the 80s. A lot of people hadn't come out when they got AIDS. His mother told him, "I'd rather you told me you were a serial killer," and disowned him. And so my mom moved in with him to care for him as he was going down, and would call and put him on the phone even when he was going into a coma, and just kept his spirits up. The best thing about my mom is that no matter what was happening, she had a laugh. She was one of these gallows humor people. She trained me early on to appreciate good Black humor. It's just, nothing helps you get through a rough time like a good sick joke. Dark humor is just, it's something that's always been in my life. And I don't think I probably could have survived some of the things unless I was able to laugh at them.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by BetterHelp.
Jonathan, is there something interfering with your happiness or preventing you from achieving your goals?
I'm pretty good, but I'm worried about you. Sometimes when your routine changes, you get very upset.
That does interfere with my happiness. Well, therapy's been very helpful in helping me not get so bent out of shape. I still have a ways to go. BetterHelp can help you assess your needs, and they will match you with your own licensed professional therapist. You can even start communicating in under 48 hours. This is not self-help. It's not a crisis line. This is professional counseling done securely online. There's a broad range of expertise, which in many cases isn't available in your area. The service is for clients worldwide, and you can log into your account anytime and message your counselor. You'll get responses from them, and you can schedule your weekly video or phone sessions. You won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room again. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating a great match for you. They make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional counseling. Financial aid is available. There's no reason not to pursue a happier life today. Visit their website, read the testimonials. They're posted every day. So many people are using BetterHelp. They're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states, and you can join the over 1 million people who are taking charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. It is so important. Get help today.
And our listeners get 10% off the first month of online therapy at betterhelp.com/break. That's betterhelp.com/break.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Whoop.
We talk a lot about the importance of knowing yourself and listening to your body. And that's why we're excited to talk about Whoop. It's a fitness tracker designed specifically to help you know yourself better so you can build healthier habits. It provides personal insight into how much stress you take on during the day, how much a workout stresses you out, and therefore how much recovery you might need before you work out again. It's like having a personal trainer that lets you know what your body's ready to handle, how hard to push, and how much sleep you'll need to recover. Also has a built-in journal feature where you can track behaviors like meditation, taking CBD, logging special stressful moments, and you get a report every month that shows how those things impact your sleep and your recovery. You get all of that insight for less than $30 a month. We recommend Whoop to anyone, regardless of fitness level. It gives you data that's incredibly helpful to anyone who wants to know themselves on a better level, no matter if you're an athlete or just a person like me who tries to work out some days.
For all of our listeners, if you've been thinking about giving Whoop a shot, there is no better time than now. You can save 15% off Whoop with the code BREAKDOWN. Go to Whoop, that's WHOOP.com, and use the code BREAKDOWN at checkout to save yourself 15% off today.
Whoop!
When I decided to write this book, there have been so many scary portraits of schizophrenics, and people have this idea that they're violent, drug-abusing, alcoholic, batterers, and it's just the opposite. Schizophrenics actually have less tendency to be violent. And when my mom was, after a spectacular breakdown, which I write about in the book, which took place right in this room, actually, I felt, and I had to lure her out of the house. She refused to see any doctors. I had to lure her out of the house to pretend we were going to Krispy Kreme. And instead, we were going to the senior psych ward where I was able to get her admitted. And as soon as she was diagnosed, it just was like 5 decades, or 45 years, just made clear for me. This was the explanation for all of this. But she was smart enough to know that if she ever copped being schiz in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, she would have lost her job, lost her kids, been in a lobotomized. And so she very carefully stayed away from any psychologist, psychiatrist.
Jonathan and I talk a lot on this podcast about sort of, comorbidity, the things that occur together, often with mental illness. And one of the things you said is that, for whatever reason, the fact that she did not become, someone who relied on alcohol or street drugs, that actually kind of in some ways protected her, because it's sort of, there was, I don't want to say less interference, but there was less added complexity to what was already a very, very delicate, that's what struck me. She was a strong woman, but there was also a real fragility to her. And, I was telling Jonathan, when you tried to figure out which medications might be causing her extra. Okay, so hold on. So
the drug sample.
Yeah. That was this blew my mind. So when she hit her 70s, right? So you had been living with her. How old was she when? I'm trying to do the math. You were 40. How old was she when she moved in with you?
She was 77 when she moved in.
Okay, so she was 77. After you moved her in, what started happening is what happens honestly with many people of that age and beyond, which is what can look like some aspects of dementia. And that can be, generally confusion, trouble with cognitive tasks. There can be some agitation, sometimes not really knowing exactly where you are. So you started seeing things, though, that began progressing into more the complexity. It was almost as if some of her inhibition went away. in that anything that was inhibiting all of those thoughts, those fears, those stories, it's kind of like they all came out at you. And one of the things that you noticed is she had a lot of medications that she took. And you had said she would kind of like collect them, over the years. Like,
yes.
here's this. But what you did is you did a very brave experiment, which I do not recommend. But what you did is you tried, you were still...
It was the opioids. This was at the very beginning of the opioid epidemic.
And so what you did is you still... also weren't like, oh, well, she must be schizophrenic. Let's get her to a doctor. You were like,
no idea, had no idea.
Right, and that's what's amazing. So you said, let's take all these pills in a very controlled, safe environment, and let's see what happened. And you went through them. Was it with Jack?
No, it was with my good friend David Cohen from DC, who is also really, really close with my mom.
Okay,
yeah.
So you and David, that's right, it wasn't Jack. So you and David, again, did a very, very controlled, I approve as a scientist, very controlled experiment. It's the only thing I can approve of publicly. But what you did is you tried to figure out, like, maybe one of these pills is doing it. And what you discovered is that, indeed, some of these medications were incredibly confusing. They caused a deep, which is, why they are abused in many situations. But this was like, I think, one of my favorite endings to a chapter. And you're a very good writer. But this ending to the chapter was like, after this whole experiment of taking all these different drugs and like literally charting, well, this one did this, got to throw that out. Well, this one did, we can't keep that. Oh, Vicodin works, but not as much as she's taking. And you literally ended the chapter by saying, we figured it out.
We thought we had figured it out.
Like, we've got her on the right pills, not the wrong ones. Everything's going to be fine.
Yeah, there was one pill that we sampled, and one of my best friends is a doctor, Jeff Holliday. Because his last name is Holiday, of course, we all call him Doc Holiday. But he said she's on too many, and he was very good when I first moved her back, getting her acclimated, and he said she's on way too many painkillers. You got to tell her to pick one. So as you said, yes, we David came down and we did a little control group sample over a long weekend. There was one, I think it was the big dose of gabapentin. We couldn't even follow the plot on Green Acres. And we thought, we're like big guys and she's this frail woman. And, this just, so it was an interesting thing, but we did think we had solved it. We thought we had solved it.
It's an exceptionally difficult part of the book when that kind of final unraveling, that leads you to have to fool her, to get her help. But I remember when I got to that section, the thing that was really beautiful about this book is like, it was almost over. And I don't mean that I wanted the book to end. I meant that the beauty of your story and your storytelling was in telling what Perry was like. And I love, you called her Perry.
She changed her name every time she moved.
I love that.
And Perry Lawrence, she wanted a unisex name. And so she was living in Palm Springs at the time. She was, Eleanor Berg was, I think, her birth name, and then all these other different things, names we didn't even know. But she actually called me from Palm Springs and said, I think I want to change my name to Perry Lawrence. And they'll give you an ID here if you're an old lady and you come in with a piece of mail that has that name on it. So send me a postcard addressed to Perry Lawrence. And if I like the feel of it, I'll take it to the DMV. She loved it. And that's how she got her driver's license. I'm not kidding.
When you get to this part of the story, the bulk of the story is really about your love for her, your care for her, the adventures really that being in her life brought you. Tell us a little bit about that kind of unraveling, how you made that decision to kind of get her help and what that was like.
Well, and it's the reason I wrote the whole book is that, our care for old people in this country is pretty shoddy. And as we saw with the tragedy of COVID, so many people are just parked in nursing homes and people write them off. And I studied in Italy. I lived in Italy for a while, and there they have a totally different outlook on seniors. They value them and appreciate them. And I do too. I've always loved old people. Even when I was young, I didn't like my peers. I preferred older people. But she had so much to offer, but she was just not getting this treatment. And so it was dragging her kicking and screaming to get some treatment. But as soon as she was diagnosed schizophrenic, and while she was still in the psych ward for a few weeks, I read every memoir there was on schizophrenia. And I can tell you, 90% of them are really dismal. It's about how this family's entire lives were ruined. These sisters had to change their names so their mother couldn't find them. They were all really, really dramatic. And I thought, you know what? There has never been a book about a highly functioning, witty, intelligent schizophrenic who somehow struggled by. And it makes schizophrenics always portrayed as these sad victims of circumstance and of their own biochemistry. But as soon as I read that, and I read one of the most recent schizophrenia memoirs in which a neurologist said, all of the written material, all of the published scientific reports, all of the books are about schizophrenics who received care early on and were studied in a controlled environment, whether in a facility or their parent went to visit them every 3 months. And I thought, oh my God, the bitch lived with me for 5 years. I can really relay the details of what it's like for someone who's never been treated into their 80s. And I felt it was my obligation, in addition to my animal rights work during the daytime at PETA, I felt it was my obligation to really tell her story because I feel like she's such an enjoyable character. She has such a great, twisted sense of humor. She has such compassion, such in the vanguard of animal rights, gay rights, all these things, that I wanted to portray a character, a real-life character, who was kind of like a beleaguered survivor who just crawled through rather than a victim, a sad victim. And that's why I wrote the book. And I also felt it was important to write a funny book with twisted scenes and a lot of funny situations, even funny situations in the senior psych ward, because I think there's a funny side to everything. And let's face it, we can get through the life right now is full of so much negativity and drama everywhere you turn. And I thought this pill needs to be sugar-coated a little bit so that people will read it if they didn't otherwise want to read a book about mental health or schizophrenia, because it's a vivid portrayal of someone who actually made it into her 80s without being treated, but then got treated, and most of the voices dissipated by the last year of her life. And so it was a story that I think needed to be told.
Yeah, and I think also that's sort of what was so enjoyable about the way you tell this story, because it's almost like, I don't want to say that, that you forget that she's schizophrenic as you're reading this book, because if you read the flap or you read the back, but what really struck me was that it's such a mother-son, loving, beautiful journey that you take together. And just also how much you included her in your life, how much she was a part of your and Jack's growth. And, I love that as a persona, and I love that as her persona. And, there's pictures, every chapter. And I think one of my favorite ones is when she's dressed as Amy Winehouse. And I was like,
Halloween is a major event.
Correct. And so and I just loved that it's just such an awesome picture. And, she was a lot of fun. The details leading up to her, being hospitalized and sort of what that was like, it's heartbreaking. And it's also really, really beautiful because, she got to then be home, in her space. And I've been through hospice with my father. And so also just, anytime I read about someone's experience with that transition, it's, it's obviously very emotional, but it's so particular, to the person. And, people say like, we die the way we live, and there was so much joy and kind of creative spirit to how you lived your life with her, and how she was able to live her life.
It's interesting you say that it's hard to believe that she was schizophrenic. And I actually wrote it in a way where I had to keep that secret. Obviously, anyone listening to this knows now, but I wanted to portray her as this funny person. I mean, I think also people think you moving your parents, your life is going to zero social life. They're going to not approve. I knew my mom better than that. So I moved her in, and I was dating a guy for a few years who was actually a prostitute. He was a escort. And my mom really loved him. And I told her how he supported himself. And she said, Danny, never, ever refer to him as a hustler. Oh. Just say that he's in real estate and manages a very large rental property. And so, of course, he loved that, and my friends loved that. And here in Portsmouth, it's a big Navy town and a big shipyard town, and we've got some great honky tonks just around the corner here. And she was a little bit too deaf to go to them much at night, but she would always urge me to bring people home. So last call was usually at our place, and
right.
Sometimes it was our bartender friends, an ex-con friend who gave her a laptop when he saw how crappy hers was, just people that became really good friends with both of ours. And I never asked these people for help. Will you help me look after my, decrepit mother who's rounding the bend? No, they all loved her, and she would hold court in her bedroom at 2 a.m. and was interested in whatever anyone had to say. There was she was very, very hard of hearing, and I think a lot of that was self-imposed hearing problems because she was trying to tune out the voices.
Yep.
But these really sweet, these two guys, these deaf mute hillbillies came over with their dog one night after the bar closed, and they sat up writing jokes to each other and laughing and laughing. I went to bed and I could hear them laughing downstairs still. Because I live in Portsmouth, Virginia, and there's so many great, colorful characters of every persuasion here, red, blue, straight, gay, black, white, we are a true melting pot here in Portsmouth. And it really showed, I think, America at its best. All these people who really didn't care, no matter how much of an anarchist or of a firebrand she was, people with guns on their belt loops coming over to help look after her.
Yeah, she was very feisty of like the progressive variety. She was she was want to say things like, well, that's why I'm a communist. She was like that lady.
Exactly. She was such a brilliant, smart character. She, always kept her wits about her, read every history book, read newspapers from around the world, really knew what was going on in the world, despite her schizophrenia. But as things started winding down, and it was clear when she was diagnosed, it was because she was reaching an age where her body was starting to shut down, and she could no longer pretend not to hear the voices. And so they came barreling through. I came home from work after a really rough day, and she just lashed out and said, I heard you got fired today. It's because you need to get a haircut. You really look like a homeless person. I mean, just like and this is why, of course, people can't live with that.
Non-linear is actually the clinical term. It's that kind of non-linear thinking. And yeah.
And Jack had such patience, and I don't know how I could have gotten through it without him walking me down. And she was always very even keel to him, but to me, I think schizophrenics will often lash out at the people who they're closest with because it's just there's these weird trust issues. But I think as soon as that started happening and she was diagnosed, I felt like this is the reason I bought the house. This is the reason I moved her in. It's almost like I knew somehow deep inside of me, because of how I ran to the other side of the world after high school to get away from her, I knew that there was unfinished business and that this had to be settled. I didn't really know what it was, but as soon as she was diagnosed, I thought, okay, now I know what I'm doing. I learned a lot of lessons. You don't argue with schizophrenics. You don't say there's nobody under the bed taking notes on their mental thoughts. That's real to them. All schizophrenia is an excess of dopamine in your system, and it muddies messages going from one part of your brain to the other, and so you can't tell them that these things aren't happening. And so I learned some really valuable lessons, not only for people with schizophrenia, but for people dealing with other types of dementia, is you just acknowledge it and move on. Oh, really? There's people under your bed? How awful. Do you want a martini?
Most people can't even do that with parents who are not schizophrenic. And this is like a really important point that you drive home in the book, which also there was a radical form of therapy for schizophrenics in the 1960s that was done, where they would essentially allow people to live in those delusions. And obviously, that was a very specific time in history, and it was done in a very specific clinical setting. But exactly what you said, that lesson that you learned is something that, like, I have trouble just like doing with my ex-husband, or with my parents, that like there's that need, especially with our parents, like, but I have to be right. But it's so important that everything be right. And it makes me crazy that they think they're right and they're wrong. And that notion of like, what if you take your hands off the wheel of control, especially with your parents, right? And just say, okay, you might be right. let's move on. Like, that's a lesson that is so important that you talk about.
It really was. It was the biggest lesson for me to learn, because everything became much more peaceful as soon as you didn't have to insist that, Jack and I were here watching TV one night, laying on the couch, and she came in and she said, "You guys, there's people standing on the street staring in at you guys." And of course, we live half a floor up. There was nobody in the streets, but she was just paranoid that there were people in the streets staring at us. And we were like, "No, okay, well, we'll close the curtains." Just like there's always, you just learn to circumvent it. We walked in one time and she was on the phone with my nephew talking about Russian cinema.
Right.
And we stood in the hallway and I thought, oh my God, she's talking to Grant about Russian cinema in such a lucid way. Because my family are Russian Jews that fled at the turn of the 20th century. And they were talking about all that. And then I thought, wait a second, she hasn't spoken on a phone in years. She can't hear well enough to speak on a phone. Does she? And so we crept a little closer and looked in the kitchen. She was standing there having such a complete dialogue, not a monologue, that Jack and I were convinced we could hear a little buzz of Grant's voice come through the other end of the phone. And then we just walked in and she said, "Oh, hi." And I said, "Oh, hi, what's going on?" She said, no, nothing much. I was just catching up with someone. And I thought, how sweet. This is before I knew about the schizophrenia. I thought maybe this is just dementia, and it was a very pleasant conversation, and she seems happy about it. I'm not going to question anything about it. So throughout the book, there's all these signs that it's not like I ignored them. They didn't add up to much of what I thought was anything.
What a blessing also. I mean, you're unbelievable, because what a blessing to her that you were able to, that you were able to give her that gift of just the dignity of her experience. And you think about the generations and generations of people who did not have that dignity, either from their children or from the medical establishment. I mean, that's unbelievable. Where did you get that strength?
I don't know. I just, she is so special and got me through the 70s and, the gay bashing era and the AIDS era and everything else in a way that a lot of people, especially gay men from my era, they have to reinvent themselves when they get out of college or out of high school because they were a completely different closeted person to them. I never had that. I never had to be closeted. I got to start as being me when I was 9 or whatever. I never had to pretend to be something else. And as I grew older, I saw so many people that didn't get to even start their life really until they were in their 20s. And I thought I owed that all to her, 100%. And so she got me into this world with such incredible strength and power, and I'm going to get her out with in the same dedication. But also, Jack was a big influence as well. And Jack is a production designer for indie films, and he would look up. He would do sets that had to be from the 1920s or the 1940s, and my mother would spend her days finding architecture and interior designs from that era for him, and then we'd all go thrift shopping on the weekends, and she would pull something that was Art Nouveau. I would go to the record section.
Dan,
so we all
it's too
worked
cute.
in concert.
It's too freaking cute. So the cutest thing is right before, after she was diagnosed and it was really rough, and my brothers were back for her last Thanksgiving, and an old friend of hers. And Jack had done the sets for The Men Who Built America on the History Channel about the late 1800s, all Carnegie, Rockefeller, Ford. And my mom said to him, she had a picture of her foster mother. Dan, I can't. Go ahead.
She gave Jack, when he was going up to West Virginia, Harper's Ferry, to do the sets and for the filming, she came to him and said, "This is the only person who ever cared about me when I was a child, my wonderful godmother, foster mother. Will you please put her photo on Carnegie's desk, because she loved all the Carnegie libraries that he built, and she was a big book person, and it would just be wonderful for her to go into eternity as a Carnegie on his desk." So he said, "I'll put it on his desk. I'll give it my best shot. You don't know how they're going to edit, where they're going to pan, what they're going to zoom on, but I'll try. You can count on me to give it my best shot." So we didn't know. We were all watching it when it aired. And Campbell Scott does the narration, and they cut to Carnegie's office, and there is my mother's godmother's picture on the desk. And we all gasped. I mean, we couldn't believe it. She just was standing at the TV and she didn't gasp. She just nodded and she said, "Now I can die a happy old lady. Thank you, Jackie." And it was really something. And so it was, as the book shows, it was a real group effort. And, we're all acting out of desperation. Jack was going through a divorce after 19 years, coming out to his kids. My mom helped him do that, and I helped him do that. He helped me with my mom. I ended up becoming close with his ex-wife. It's just, I think, we all are at such odds with our family and with ex-lovers, and there's just a lot of bitterness. I think the big message from this book is, if we just let it all go and remember the things that we loved about somebody and keep those front and center to get through the rough times, it will all just be a lot better off. And I think the people that were total, acquaintances who became really close friends, who bonded with my mom or Jack's kids and the grandkids. She met the first of the grandkids before she died. Now we have 7. Jack's like one of the nation's top breeders. But it just ended up being a wonderful, strange, we were desperate in the ways that a lot of people are, struggling financially. I bought this dilapidated house right before the stock market crash of 2008. Jack had all these things, but, we had love and we had affection and determination to make each other's lives turn out comfortably and nice, regardless of whatever we had upstairs or in the bank. And I think it's just a good message, because I think it shows that if you give people a chance, everybody really wants to kind of pitch in and help when people have good attitudes and have a sense of fun and a sense of adventure and compassion.
Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Ancestry.
Maybe you've thought about learning about your family history and you thought, I don't want to learn about it. It's going to take a lot of time and a lot of work. But with just your grandmama's name and one place that she lived, Ancestry can give you all kinds of amazing details you never knew. There are so many things that I want to know, and Ancestry is the way to find those things out. It's a family history search simplified. In just a few minutes, Ancestry Story Scout can find interesting stories, not just about your grandparents, but family members even from multiple generations back. You don't even need to know anything about family history to build a family tree quickly on Ancestry. With just a few facts, you can start a tree and add to it with a hint feature that leads you to your family. You might even connect with other people who share common ancestors with you. Like for me, all of Eastern Europe. Even if you've never done family history before, the little leaves called hints on Ancestry can lead you to discoveries in minutes. I mean, imagine what it would feel like to click on a hint and find something amazing super quick. What would you want to find in a 60-second discovery?
Ancestry has a fresh way to uncover new stories and details about your family, starting with just the name of a grandparent. Try it at ancestry.com/breakdown. That's ancestry.com/breakdown. Mayim Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Nutrafol.
I'm not embarrassed to say it. I am among the 30 million women who are impacted by weakened and kind of thinning hair. If you're one of those women, please know you're not alone. There's a solution that you can trust to deliver results. Thousands of women have taken back control of their hair with Nutrafol, raving that the supplement not only transforms your hair, but can restore your confidence. Nutrafol has 2 targeted formulas for women that are clinically shown to improve hair growth and thickness with less shedding through all stages of life. And you can experience thicker, stronger, faster growing hair in 3 to 6 months. In a clinical study, 86% of women reported improved hair growth after 6 months, and more than 1,500 top doctors recommend Nutrafol as an effective and high-quality solution for healthier hair. It is physician formulated. It's 100% drug-free. They use medical-grade botanicals in consistently effective dosages, and you get the most reliable results. Go to Nutrafol.com and take their hair wellness quiz for personalized product recommendations that are unique to your hair's needs. Jonathan, tell the ladies.
You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com and entering the promo code BREAK. And you save $15 off your first month subscription. That's their best offer anywhere, and it's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus, Free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com.
Spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code BREAK.
Mayim and Bialik's Breakdown is supported by Honey.
I love to shop online. It's convenient, it's fun, and you don't have to put on your pants. We all shop online, and we've all seen that promo code field taunt us at checkout. But thanks to Honey, manually searching for coupon codes is a thing of the past. Honey is a free shopping tool that scours the internet for promo codes and applies the best one that it finds to your cart. It's pretty amazing. They range from sites that have tech and gaming products to popular fashion brands and even food delivery. My assistant Alyssa and I had a great time using Honey to get free shipping on Fred's new desk. Honey has found its over 17 million members over $2 billion in savings.
Also, Mayim, they support more than 30,000 stores online. If you do not have Honey already, you could be straight up missing out on savings. It's literally free and installs in a few seconds. And by getting it, you're doing yourself a solid and you're supporting the podcast.
Get Honey for free at joinhoney.com/break. That's joinhoney.com/break. I did have one other question. One of the things that kind of came up throughout your time with her was really a series of, I don't want to say secrets, but, elements of her past and, things that you learned about her almost indirectly. It was almost like solving a mystery that was Perry,
Mm-hmm.
You had all of the edge pieces, but a lot of the middle ones were kind of still missing. And I mean, things like other children, her experience in the orphanage. I mean, just she was assaulted in her 60s, all of these things that you can't imagine also that she experienced, that's who made Perry, was, just the brother, so many twists and turns.
I'm so glad you brought that up because I have a very heartwarming update that you won't even believe it. I still am coming to terms with it. So the book came out last August, and in the book I write about how my mom confesses about how she had these 2 kids out of wedlock when she was in the 1940s. Fresh out of the orphanage. Working the USO clubs during World War II and in Washington D.C. And one of them was Patty, her daughter Patty, who she gave up, and it was the shame of her life. She gave Patty up to the doctors, and they signed papers that she was never to know. Patty was never to know who her real mother was. And my mom, I was writing the book, and she begged me not to put that in the book because she still felt such shame about it. And I said, I have to. We have to tell the real story. Mm-hmm. And boy, am I glad I did.
What
because
happened?
The story about Patty is basically on one page, halfway through the book. Mm-hmm. This woman named Marcy, who lives in Rochester, New York, who loves memoirs and happened to buy my book the day it came out. I don't know her. I'd never met her. She was not a PETA person or whatever. She read it, and she got to the part on Patty, and she started researching online.
Stop it.
A week to the day after the book was out, I get a message on Instagram. Do you accept the message from this stranger or whatever? And I looked, and it looked like my mom. It was odd.
Stop it.
I pressed accept the message, and the message said, "Thank you for writing this book.
Stop it.
I finally saw a picture of my mother.
Oh, God.
It's Patty." And Jack and I were watching the Democratic National Convention. I've never fallen off the couch. I actually fell off the couch. And I messaged her right back. She lives in Maryland, outside of Annapolis on the Maryland shore. And we, of course, Jack was adopted 3 times. And, my mom had been through all of that. So this total stranger connected me to my long lost sister, Patty, who we went up to see. And she is just not only the spitting image of my mom, but the same mannerisms, the same chattiness, the same sense of humor.
Amazing.
And so now, this book, if nothing else, it brought me to my sister. And she is just a delight. She has a wonderful husband and has 2 kids of her own, now my niece and nephew. And it just brought the whole thing together. And it's just from some wonderful woman, Marcy in Rochester, who's now a part of our family. We had this giant Zoom with my brothers and my sister-in-laws, and they were. My sister-in-law Beta was hiding behind my brother Pat when the Zoom started because she thought it was my mom back from the grave. That's how close it was, and so it's just wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience, and it's lowered the stigma on schizophrenia. It shows how people can get, and every case is different. So I'm not making a blanket statement, but just knowing what it is half the battle. If I had known what this was earlier in my life, I would have slept a lot better. And I think, that's why, a lot of people that have written schiz memoirs and schiz books who I reached out to, they wrote it, they got it out of their system, and they're done with it. They don't want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. This was something that was a shadow over my entire first 45 years of my life. And I want to get it out there so that people can recognize this in their friends or their loved ones or maybe even themselves and figure out a way to talk about it. And I got a wonderful message on Facebook from a woman who lives in Yorktown, Virginia. And she messaged me and said that she just picked it up at Barnes & Noble and she bought it right away because her mother was schizophrenic. She was from North Carolina. And the book articulated in a way that she was able to give the book to her daughter so that her daughter could understand what it was like for her growing up with a schizophrenic, even though the situation was not identical. It was a lot of the same similarities. And after she got her vaccine, just a few weeks ago, we met her for a little socially distant beer in Yorktown, her and her husband, and she just it made the veil of shame and secrecy. Nobody wants to cop to this thing or talk about it or say that a relative has it. I want to just be out there about it in a very conversational, casual way because it's just a fact of life. And if we ignore it, it's only going to make our stress worse and the conditions worse for the person suffering from it.
One final question. Schizophrenia will typically present young, and often one of the largest fears of those of us who grow up with mental illness in our family is that we too will have it. And it's almost like you were saved some of that specific anxiety, in your teens, in your 20s, which is when a lot of us start kind of like ruminating about it. And with schizophrenia, there's a lot of genetic studies and, there's a lot to schizophrenia. But have you had any experience with that or thinking about it or wondering? I mean, you have, there's many siblings.
Absolutely.
And yeah.
There's a whole a chapter in the book which takes place in my bathtub when she was in the senior psych ward, and I'm devouring every memoir on schiz and thinking back of my own childhood and about my nieces and nephews. And my mom's mother was a much more violent. My mom wasn't violent at all, but she was a very, very tempestuous schizophrenic who it was clear, and it was clear that my mom got a watered down version of whatever her mother had before she ended up in the foster care and in the orphanages. And I had the frank conversation with my niece and nephews about it because they were all late teens when this book came out last year, when I was writing it, over the last 10 years. And so I think it is a frank discussion that we have to have. And I think that there are shades, because schizophrenia, it's not like having the flu or not. You can have 5 symptoms or you can have 20 symptoms, and you can have 5 different ones than somebody else. And so this chapter, which, by the way, I think I can make available as a free read on your site.
Great.
Because I think it's a short chapter, but it gives a good sense of the voice of the book and an explanation of schizophrenia in I think a kind of, if it can be in a funny way. But it does. And I did reflect on my own self, because I've always been a little bit out there, and then I kind of had to come to my senses, and some of the hallmarks of schizophrenia are not being able to maintain friendships, and as I write, I am blessed with more friends than an ecstasy dealer at Burning Man. You have a hard time maintaining a job. I've been working at PETA since Reagan was president, and you hear voices, and I think of my drag queen friend, Lady Bunny, who has this great joke. I went to the psychiatrist and he said, "Bunny, do you ever hear voices in your head?" And I said, "Well, yes, doctor. And one of them just asked if I ever hear voices in my head." Now we all hear voices in our head. We all hear, different things. But it's a little bit different when it's schizophrenic and you can't turn it off. Mm-hmm. But I think it's good because we can reflect on our own situation. I think some people are flavored with a few schizophrenic traits. Schizoid affective is on the way to schizophrenia, but
Correct.
not quite there.
And this is all a spectrum, which we talk about here. It really is a spectrum of chemicals. It's not like, we can literally look at you and be like, yes, schizophrenic or no schizophrenic. It's about a diagnostic set of criteria and intensity and severity. And yeah, it's very complicated.
Exactly.
Obviously.
And I think that the big impact on me personally from writing this book and from experiencing the whole thing was, and I always was pretty easygoing about people suffering from mental health issues. They never freaked me out. I never recoiled or wanted to go to the other end of the bar. Here in Portsmouth, 4 blocks that away is the Portsmouth Naval Hospital. And a lot of people coming back from the Middle East who are suffering PTSD recovered there before they're shipped back home to Wisconsin or Rhode Island or whatever. And some of them come out to the bars here. And Jack and I have become very attuned to who is having, PTSD, and they're often sitting on their own. They don't want to talk about it, but they do want to talk about other things. So we include them in our, dinner parties, not since COVID, but we include them we have a vinyl record room over here. We have a lot of dance parties, dinner parties, and we include them in our circle of friends as we would any cool person that is in Portsmouth. And it's been a real pleasure. And when their girlfriends or their families come down to pick them up, they come over here as well. And it's just kind of nice to be a welcome wagon for people. And I've never once been afraid. I know people are afraid of people are going to snap or people are going to do this. You got to get out of your head. I think you just got to not be afraid of people, and you've got to be open-minded and open-hearted to other people. And it's just, there's so much stigma. And my mission with this book is to really destigmify mental health and schizophrenia in particular. And because she died right before Christmas, there's that wonderful ending where it's a very cinematic ending that takes place during the holidays. I won't get into it, but it's cinematic enough that that kid Ed Productions at Netflix came a calling and has already got this book in development for a film. Who knows if these things will ever happen because there's so many obstacles for a production to get made. But I do think it has a wonderful, uplifting message, and the ending, which actually. I actually opened the book with that scene and then flashed back to the 5 years and then go back up to that. And the only edit Simon & Schuster made on this book was they said, you can't start with the ending and flashback because there's nowhere to go after that. You have to really have that be the grand finale.
No, and there's some expression about how it was like a gay, it all came together like a big gay conspiracy. That's my favorite part. We'll leave it for people to read this book. Your mother, may her memory only be for a blessing, made her farewell as a grand dame among gays. And it's just a beautiful, beautiful ending.
In the theater, no less.
In the theater. Dan Mathews, the book is Like Crazy, Life with My Mother and Her Invisible Friends. What a delightful, special, beautiful approach to articulating the complexity of mental illness. And you're a man among men for not only your writing and sharing this, but for the gift that you gave your mother. It's absolutely astounding. And you and Jack, it's just, I'm just nuts about you. I am crazy for Like Crazy. And also just the fact that it comes from like a PETA hero and also like a Russian Jew, like we're also related. It's so great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And when I get back to LA, we're going to have a vegan Reuben together.
Oh my gosh. We'll do a whole vegan Reuben sampling. I don't know how some people are made with that resolve to be like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to handle this part of life. He's like a saint. Like, he sounds like he, and I know that he wasn't always perfect with her. I'm sure he had his moments, and he did. But the notion of like, oh, well, if I just kind of like stop fighting with her about everything, like everybody's reality is better.
That's what I'm going to start doing. That's going to be my motto in life. It's pretty much just a yes and game. Try to throw me off. Go.
Jonathan, I really don't like that this person did that.
I'd be like, yeah, that's really hard.
Thank you.
What's for dinner tonight? Just acknowledge and redirect. My grandfather suffered from dementia, And I was quite young when it happened, and my mother would bring us to visit him. And my older brother was phenomenal because he would go into the room and whatever my grandfather said, he was yes. And like I, as a 12-year-old really struggled with that like lack of predictability or reality. And like, I didn't know how to play the game. And my brother just like nothing fazed him. And he made my grandfather so happy. And even when my grandfather was quite agitated, my brother could just sit with him, talk it out with him. They ended up playing cards, and my grandfather he got such joy from my brother visiting. And I recognized a little bit of that in Dan's story, but I think it's applicable even beyond that. People have their realities. You're not going to convince people that something they really believe is true. And we're constantly fighting and arguing to have our points met. But sometimes it's just like, yes, okay. And also, what else can we connect on?
He's right. There are a lot of memoirs written about schizophrenia and about growing up in a schizophrenic home and things like that. And he really does put such a different spin on schizophrenia in particular, but on mental illness in general.
Obviously, it's about the time that she grew up and the time period, that she grew up. But don't you think a lot of people, if not schizophrenic, are like undiagnosed depression, undiagnosed ADD, undiagnosed anxiety?
Okay, so great question. It's a great question, Jonathan. And the answer is absolutely. Happens all the time.
How many stories do we hear about people who are like, I listened to this episode of a podcast, or I listened to this person's story, or I read this article, and then like, oh my gosh, my experience that I've been struggling with makes so much more sense.
100%, as you like to say. However, schizophrenia is a whole other ballgame. Yeah. Schizophrenia is one of those things that when people are diagnosed, which happens a lot of times in your 20s, your 20s or 30s, it's like, welcome to the rest of your life. These pills, this regimen, like blah, blah, blah. It is it's very difficult. It's very complicated. Her variation of schizophrenia, is also needs to be taken into account. She knew kind of almost instinctively to avoid the opinions of others that way. I mean, she had a completely independent world. And also, I think it's so interesting that he described her as high functioning, but she was high functioning when someone was managing her life, on her own and left to her own devices. Life was very difficult for that woman. I mean, it's unbelievable. It is unbelievable, like the way that she managed to manage with that level of, again, like people would say eccentricity, but what she described when she started taking the right medication, when they finally diagnosed her, it's not that the voices went away, it was less intrusive. It was less difficult to manage. And just like, think of the mental energy that it takes if you're depressed to try and show up for someone, right? Or to try and like go to your job. If you're anxious, if you've ever experienced mania or hypomania, you can't just bring that shit down. Like, that's a chemical experience. So schizophrenia is operating at this level of dopamine, like flooding your system. And it's going to do different things depending on a lot of other aspects of your brain chemistry, your experience. And what he does talk a little bit about the history of schizophrenia and diagnostic schizophrenia. It happened in a time in history when there was a tremendous amount of confusion in the late 19th century, meaning we had immigrants and people with different languages and different cultures, and everything was coming together, and like industrial revolution, like all these things. And the fact is, some brains said, no thanks. Like, this does not compute. So to operate with that level of dopamine, I don't want to say dysfunction, difference, it is a constant effort to keep it together. So all the pills also that she was taking and all these different things, like that's some heavy stuff she was taking. It probably gave her a break, which is in a lot of cases what alcohol and street drugs can do for really anyone with a mental illness. Just give me a break. And if you're someone out there who is suffering, who's living and trying to live and trying not to suffer, keep in mind, all those other things that we do, those are things that we do just to keep it together. so that we can, fill in the blank, get to work, take care of the kids, whatever it is.
The line between some form of mental illness or some forms of mental illness and accessing altered realms of consciousness through spiritual exploration is very thin.
I mean, he brought up also the line between, insanity and creativity. The book opens with, hold please, a beautiful picture of Perry. Edgar Allan Poe, who was found dead in the street, drunk. Have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses? That's the Edgar Allan Poe quote that this book opens with. A lot of people get really prickly when you talk about, religious experience, spiritual experience, shamans, and insanity. And people often get really, really prickly when you talk about creativity and madness. If we sedate everyone and we make all of those sparks not sparky, that's not a world that any of us would want to engage in. The reason that people get very prickly when you say that is because they have a loved one who was so out of control that they needed to be medicated. They had to be hospitalized. And don't you tell me that they shouldn't have been. And that's actually not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, welcome to the human experience. There's a full range of perception. There's a full range of spiritual experience. Some people have access to things that other people don't. And yes, I'm a scientist. It's because of chemistry. I remember when I took psychological anthropology in college at UCLA with Professor Doug Holland, and we studied a man. It was a book about a man. I believe it was, I think he was North African. I want to say Algerian. And he was likely, by Western diagnostic criteria, a schizophrenic. But in the culture that he lived in, and I'm not speaking for all of Algeria, I'm saying the time that it was written, I think it was written like in the 1950s, the 1960s. At that time, in the place that he lived, he was a shaman.
Psychosis or Spiritual Awakening, the TED Talk by Phil, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, very, 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 very popular, tons of views. And he explores this very thing, that in all other societies, people who are differently minded are not cast aside and necessarily they have a role that they're sort of brought into. Now, look, I'm not saying that can happen in Western culture, but
well, we could do a better job than we do now.
We have a much more narrow, acceptable parameter for how you can function successfully in our society than in many other places.
As I read this book, I thought of, and I will not name names, but I thought of two people that I know who definitely need psychiatric intervention, right? Like, and I don't just mean like, I wish they wouldn't act the way they did. That's you. Kidding. No, these are people who I think if you put them in front of, any psychiatrist, even any therapist, they'd be like, oh, okay. And those people function in their own way and in their own world. They do get a lot of help from other people. One of these people is a brilliant, brilliant artist. And the other is a very, very mystically inclined, spiritually connected person. And it's very painful because I want everyone to experience like the fullest, just as a human, I want everyone to experience the fullest appreciation of their specialness. I want people to appreciate my specialness, and Lord knows you've had enough conversations with me. Like, I feel everything so deeply that there's not another way. Like, I don't know another way to be. And you could give me pills. You could give me mood stabilizers. And I wouldn't have those kind of experiences.
But you're the person who brings the excitement to the podcast. If it was just, we stabilized you and we had me, it would just be this flat line all the time.
I would like to say that does not mean that I'm unstable or that people who don't take medication are not stable. It means that there is a negotiation we all have to do with our mental illness. There's a negotiation we all have to do. What allows me to live my life? What allows me to live my best life? What allows me to take care of my kids like this? And look, I'll be honest. When I went to get my vaccine shot, I went to say goodbye to my kids, I started weeping because I was nervous. I was just I get nervous. And when I get nervous, I cry. And I remember looking at my 15-year-old and I was like, what is he thinking? Like, does he wish I wasn't like this? Like, it makes me emotional because I don't want to burden him. And I make clear, like I get help. I have people that I speak to. I have parenting experts in my life, people I know who are educators, and we have a family therapist that, helped us through our divorce, who I still speak to. I don't want to burden my children, but like what I said to him is, I'm okay. I'm scared. I'm going to be okay. And I'll be back and I'll feed you lunch. What I think is that my child will grow up and he will tell that story, and he may tell that on a couch, of some therapist. And what I hope is that he will be given also the amount of insight necessary that we all have to say, like, she did the best she could and she took care of me the best she could. And it may not be right. It may not be perfect for him. But this is where I am, and this is how the rest of my life functions, And I think a lot of people are like, oh, but you're so successful and you're on a TV show. I'm a human. I'm a human with a lot of challenges.
And also all those fun times he has where you guys are laughing hysterically.
Oh, totally.
And, like, all of those highs
those things.
They come packaged with some crying.
True story. I'm not going to do a typical you might need help if for schizophrenia.
Tell people to have a nice afternoon and see them later.
I think it's important to say that if you have images in your head that are persistent and pervasive and disturbing, you might need help. If you find yourself talking to yourself, like for real, if you find yourself talking to yourself because it feels like there's a conversation happening and not just that like you need to talk something out, you might need help. If your perception of the world is such that people have started distancing themselves from you because your version of reality doesn't align with theirs, you might need help. If someone that you love is experiencing features of this, it's important for you also to get help so that you can know how best to be supportive. And honestly, reading this book is a really, really great place to start. So grateful to Dan Mathews for writing like crazy.
And while it's a very funny scene of him trying his mother's medication, don't take other people's medication.
Do not take other people's medication. And also, as he mentioned, he had a close friend who was a physician, and yeah, I mean, also everyone's body reacts differently to those kind of medications. And so the fact is, what works for some people works for some people, may not work for others. I'm sure. There are some people who are like, when I smoke pot, I feel free. And other people are like, when I smoke pot, I want to kill myself. So like, it's not that different with really a lot of medications. And sure, things like gabapentin and Xanax and kind of the Ativans of the world, those have a depressive effect, and that's generally true. Alcohol is a depressant, even though you feel good for a little while, then you don't. But also, people like me, I can't even take like antihistamine things like what is it, Sudafed and things like that. I go cuckoo pants. I get really, really not normal. So everybody's body reacts differently. I have a really funny story about the first time I took, I think it was Sudafed, and I didn't know the reaction I would have. I was a good time in an airport in the middle of this country. Anyway, we'll save that for another time.
Everyone, thank you so much for all of your support. Please give the podcast a 5-star review and recommend it to a friend. It helps us make more. And if you haven't already checked out the YouTube channel, go to Mayim and Bialik's YouTube channel, press the little bell icon for updates and notifications for new episodes that we drop. And
from our breakdown to the one we hope you never have, we'll see you next time.
It's Mayim and Bialik's breakdown. She's gonna break it down for you. She's got a neuroscience PhD or 2. One fiction, one and now she's gonna break down. It's a breakdown. She's gonna break it